Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Sanders Kleinfeld, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome screenwriter, director, producer, and novelist Charlie Kaufman to Talks at Google today. Charlie is a four-time Academy Award-nominated filmmaker, best known for his celebrated films Being John Malkovich, Adaptation, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, for which he won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, and Anomalisa. He's here to talk about his new film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which debuts on Netflix this Friday, September 4th. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is a mind-bending meditation on the nature of reality, identity, and memory, starring Jesse Buckley, Jesse Plemons, Toni Collette, and David Thewlis, which explores the story of a young woman taking a road trip with her boyfriend to his family's farm in the middle of a snowstorm. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Charlie Kaufman. Thanks so much for joining us, Charlie.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So to kick it off, I'd love to hear more about the genesis of this movie. I know it was based on the eponymous 2016 novel by Iain Reid. Could you tell us a bit about how the adaptation came about and what drew you to the source material?
I was actively looking for something to adapt. I thought I might have a better chance of getting a movie made if it pre-existed in another medium. So I was looking for novels, and I happened upon this one, and I liked it, and it was small, so I thought I could maybe get the financing. Small in terms of its budgetary needs, 4 characters more or less, and a few locations. So it seemed doable, and so I went to Netflix with my producer, Anthony Bregman, and they agreed to make it. So that was pretty much how it happened.
Awesome. Well, what really struck me in watching this movie is for an adaptation, I still kept thinking how quintessentially Charlie Kaufman it was. It felt like a real companion piece to a lot of your earlier work in terms of the themes and ideas that it explored, like Being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Really sort of deepening the philosophical inquiry at the heart of both of those two movies. A lot of really deep questions of, identity and memory that come about in the course of this movie. I was curious your thoughts about that.
Well, and thank you for thinking they're deep. But I certainly agree that was my goal, and that was the stuff that interested me about it. The novel itself is very interior, so it's a subjective piece. It's written from the point of view of the young woman, and she's going over her concerns about the relationship and also kind of some question of identity herself. So, that interested me. So that's what I was working with.
Yeah. For me, what I found really interesting is it felt like a continuation, almost, especially of Being John Malkovich, in terms of the exploration of identity. So in Being John Malkovich, you've got identity that is very literally looked at as a form of ventriloquism, expressing one's essence through other vessels. So puppetry is a metaphor, but it's also incredibly literal in that movie. And in this movie, I think that the problematizing of identity seems to go even further, just challenging the whole notion of some sort of stable intrinsic identity that's piped into other characters. So
yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely a lot that I was exploring about projection in romantic relationships, and sort of assigning people personalities and roles and qualities that you want them to have, which I think is a fairly common thing, especially early on in relationships. And the other thing that was, I think that's part of the sort of idea of almost ventriloquism, is the sort of notion of us being a product of the culture in which we live, the movies that we see, the books that we read, the sort of having this sort of curated reality by the society outside of us, for questionable reasons, often monetary reasons or reasons of capitalism, and so I was playing with that kind of thing too.
Yeah, most definitely. That totally came through, especially in the sequences in the car, in which basically the dialogue is overtaken by discourse, whether that be snippets from a poem or a Pauline Kael movie review, or the exchange around a specific Christmas song that has questionable sexual politics.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I mean, and there are quotes in the movie actually from other movies that are not pointed to, but are there, so that this person's world is kind of created by things that they've seen in the world around them, in movies and in media.
Yeah, exactly. So much of actual identity is sort of externally imposed by culture into someone's, you know, specific inherent essence, if they have one. So what I found really disorienting the first time I caught it just briefly, that the young woman who's one of two basic main characters in the movie, her name changes throughout the movie. She's referred to as Lucy at one point, and by other names at other points. So it's very disorienting, you know, even at that level, to not be able to get a read on who she is and what she does for a living as the movie progresses.
Yeah, she constantly changes. A lot of other things change too within the movie, kind of subtly, like costuming and set design and stuff like that is constantly sort of switching around. So yeah. It's there.
Yeah. So what I found really interesting in that sense, it's a very postmodern film in that basically all aspects of identity and memory are problematized to a degree. So in that sense, it feels really contemporary, but it also feels like very timeless and almost a throwback to earlier times as well. With the iconography of the ice cream shop and some of the other cultural references that exist. Aside from these few brief scenes of her using an iPhone, I felt like the movie could basically be set anytime in like the past 50 or 100 years almost. So
yeah, well, I think that there is a thing going on in the movie, and it's difficult for me to kind of talk about because I don't want to give too much away. But there is a sort of a sense of a span of years that's being presented, as if someone's remembering something, a life that goes back many, many years. So like there's different representations of the ice cream stand from different periods, as if you were looking at McDonald's ads from the 50s and the 70s and the 2000s, and how they'd be different, but they sort of represent the same company. That exists in the Tulsi Town presentation as well. So it's suggesting that there's a long time being remembered, a long period of time being remembered.
Yeah, exactly. And again, without getting too much into spoilers, that's sort of mirrored by some of the things that are happening when the young woman meets her boyfriend's parents in the farmhouse.
Exactly, yeah.
There, where a lot of the interactions become somewhat unmoored in time throughout.
Yeah, definitely, and it is along the same lines, and it is for the same reasons. How much of our lives are we living in our memories, and how many different versions of a person, for example, a parent or a child, we would have in our memories because they exist at different points of time in our memories. And I wanted that to be part of the experience.
Yeah, that definitely came across. I was also curious, this is a very interesting novel, I think, to adapt because it's a psychological thriller, so it's inherently incredibly cerebral. And I was curious what process you went through in terms of thinking about how to represent that visually on screen. Because I think the movie makes a lot of really interesting choices about how to sort of represent that disquiet visually.
Yeah, I mean, I used some of the images from the book. The book is a monologue in the head of this woman. So it's a lot of talking, and I used some of that to sort of, I wanted to keep it in her voice, but I didn't want it to just be wall to wall talking. So I think that I had in my head what I felt were like images that could be pulled from memory or fantasy or dreams, and I tried to talk to my production people and trying to create that on the set, and also the actors and to try to convey not necessarily the experience of the book, because this is separate from the book, but my version of that story, which is what I had to do because it's my version of that story. I couldn't do Iain's version of the story because that's Iain's version of the story. I had to somehow make it mine so that I understood it from my own very subjective point of view. So, that was the process really of adaptation, was deciding what worked for me from the book, what could or could not translate to a movie in my mind, and what I would do to bridge the gulf between those things.
Yeah, I thought one thing that the cinematic choices did really incredibly well was conveyed this feeling of real claustrophobia, especially the car sequences, so which are really extended. And there was something about the way it was filmed where you're never really inside the car; you're just sort of peering in through the windows, but you're external to what's going on, but still really confined at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, they're all claustrophobic elements, usually in the movie. You are inside the car actually sometimes, but you are outside of it a lot. But even when you're inside, the characters are isolated, and it's a very small space. And in some of that, you're just dealing with the practical constraints of filming people in a car. But my cinematographer Wukash Sal and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this should feel like, because a lot of it is very static. It's in a car, it's around a dinner table, it's in a sitting room. There's not a lot of movement, and we didn't want that to be tedious. And there's a kind of a choice we made in camera movements that are designed to sort of feel like they're anticipating the action, because that was the thought, that when you're imagining a scene, what's coming next, you as the person imagining it. And so we wanted to sort of present that as almost jumping ahead of the story. So often the camera leads the character. It'll move to like Jesse Plemons before he says something. When the camera lands on him, he'll say something. It'll move to the living room, at which point he'll invite her to sit in the living room, and then she'll go there. Those kind of things were one of our kind of designs to kind of create that sense of life in a very sort of constrained space.
Yeah, one thing I thought related to that was really interesting. Like, you chose a very interesting aspect ratio for the movie itself, which I think actually, added to that feeling of confinement. I think it's an aspect ratio that used to be used mostly for television, like 1.3 to 1 or something like that, as opposed to a wider screen, which we're used to now. So when you're watching it, you actually feel the action is boxed in at a meta level as well.
Yeah, Wukash wanted to use that aspect ratio. And, I liked it. And Netflix wasn't really thrilled with it as an idea, because I think their experience in the past was that people think there's something wrong with their TV, and they're afraid that people are going to turn the channel. So we experimented with different aspect ratios, and we found that this one really served the story, I think, for the reasons that you said, is that it really feels boxed in. It feels very claustrophobic. It's also somewhat sort of tense, because the less you show people, the more you don't know what's outside of that, and that also creates a tension. So it was interesting, because in our early tests, we would shoot a still photograph with that aspect ratio, and then one that was much wider, and it was like there's no tension in the wider one. So we just, we said we're going to use this, and they allowed it, obviously, because that's the movie. But so it was that was a bit of an interesting evolution of choice there.
Yeah, at first it was a little disorienting, like, just because I think we're not used to it, but it felt very, very effective in the way everything was so tightly framed throughout that. Characters, especially, I'm thinking of some of the farmhouse sequences, characters would appear and disappear out of the frame, and that was very organic because of the way it was framed, rather than having like a wider panorama. So
and I think it's really nice for close-ups, which were important in this movie.
Yeah, also relatedly, I wanted to give a shout out to all the actors in this movie. I thought the acting was absolutely incredible, incredibly challenging roles. The way that Jesse Buckley shapeshifts pretty much effortlessly through all these different personas, and the Toni Collette and David Thewlis, who play her boyfriend's parents, they're shapeshifting as well through personas, but also time as the movie progresses.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Jesse Plemons is the center of it. He's the anchor of the whole story, and everything is really being seen through his eyes. And his very subtle sense of anxiety is something that I think holds the movie together, and hopefully will be recognized as such.
Yeah, his performance is so subtle, but it's very, very deep in just the same way as the other actors are as well. That he's doing a lot with very, very subtle, changes in tone and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this has been a pretty busy year for you. In addition to I'm thinking of ending things, you also had your debut novel come out a couple months ago, Antkind. I was wondering what spurred you to sort of set aside screenwriting and do literary fiction instead.
Well, I think I couldn't get stuff made, and so this offer, I was frustrated, and this offer to write a book came up, and I thought this is an opportunity to get something made in a different medium, and so it seemed interesting to me, so I decided to go with it and see what would happen.
Great. So tell us a bit about the novel.
It's about a film critic, a somewhat unsuccessful film critic who it goes down to Florida to work on an essay, a monograph, and stumbles upon a very old man who's been making a movie for the past 90 years that is, at this point, a 3-month-long stop-motion animation. No one has seen it. The man is a recluse. The narrator of the story sees it and thinks it's the most brilliant thing he's ever witnessed. The filmmaker dies during the process of his viewing it, and the film ultimately burns up, and he's left with nothing but very little memory of it. And the rest of the book is him trying to remember the film and the various ways in which he tries. It's surreal. It's silly. I don't know. It's funny.
Basically, again, quintessential Charlie Kaufman. So
I don't know. It's very, very jokey.
Okay.
I think part of the reason I didn't really know if I wanted it to be funny when I first started writing it, or scary. I just didn't know. Excuse me. But the last movie that I'd made before I started writing it was Synecdoche, New York, and a lot of people don't seem to recognize that as a comedy, because it's a very sort of dry, dark, quiet comedy, but it is a comedy in my mind. And I just thought, well, I'm going to write a comedy that people will understand as a comedy. So that's what I set out to do. So it's got pretty much like 40 jokes a page for 700 pages. And it was a long time in the writing. It took me about 5.5 years to write it. So it's chock full of gags.
Awesome. That's a very good joke to non-joke ratio. I'm sure it'll be an incredibly entertaining read for a lot of folks. So
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we've been chatting, I've been seeing that we have a ton of comments that are coming in from the audience who's tuning in. So I'd love to do some audience questions now.
Sure.
So we have a question here from Katie, and Katie's question is: many unique and talented actors have given life to your work. Whose performance surprised you the most? Who revealed something you didn't imagine when you first wrote the character?
I'd have to say, in all honesty, every one of them, and that's the joy of bringing actors onto something that you've written is that if they're good, and the people I've worked with have always been good, is that they'll bring something surprising to it, something you didn't see or something you couldn't anticipate, or just a kind of a personality quality. And I sincerely, I'm not avoiding answering that question, although I would avoid answering that question for political reasons, but it's just the truth. I mean, everybody I've worked with has brought enormous amounts to the stuff that I've written.
Excellent. So here's a question from Ray. Charlie, so many of your characters express a fatalism about life that they can't or won't change. Do you personally feel this way? Are you a Charlie Kaufman character? I think I'm interested when I write of sort of like bucking this sort of formulaic convention that, in mainstream movies of, what does this character learn and what is the arc of this character? And I feel like those are almost forced into stories and force-fed to us as audiences. So I bristle at that. I think people can change somewhat. I think I can change. I think I've changed. I mean, but there are certain aspects of me that probably are the same as when I was, a little kid. So I guess my response is, I'm more interested in the struggle than I am in the resolution. Question from Danny. I read that you have a few projects about dreams that you're working on. Can you tell us a bit more about the projects, and why do you find dreams interesting?
I have one project about dreams, literally, although I would say that everything I do is influenced by dreams. I'm writing a movie for Ryan Gosling's company about dreams. I don't want to be more specific about the details of the story. Excuse me. But I am fascinated by dreams because I feel like they're the symbolism and the imagery and the ideas in them are not bound by sort of the mundane reality in which we live in our waking lives, and that you can have very emotional ideas and storylines in dreams that are free of that. And I find that helpful in writing, not getting stuck in that sort of, well, this couldn't happen, or how could this happen, or I don't find that interesting and an interesting sort of place to work for me. So I'm attracted to dreams for that reason.
Question from Brian. For the last 3 films, Charlie, you've been both director as well as writer. And I'm wondering if that makes it easier to align with your vision for the story.
Yes. Yeah, it does. I mean, I think there's a value to collaborating in that regard as a writer with a director. And I've had very good experiences with directors who've directed my writing. But yeah, it's a more, there's for better or worse, there's no compromise in a thing that you write and then direct. I don't, and when I say compromise, I don't mean that as a negative term. I mean, compromise can be good and useful, but I'm interested in sort of eccentricities, and I feel in my work and in the way I think and in other people's work, and I feel like those going to get sandpapered away the more people that are involved in making those kind of decisions, because you have to when I was younger, I had a writing partner and we wrote together, and it was very valuable in a lot of ways. And I learned a lot from working with him, and it was comedy, so it was very helpful because you would, the other person would laugh or not at your joke, and then you would kind of have a sense of whether it worked, which is a harder thing to do maybe by yourself. But by definition, it couldn't be very personal, the stuff we did together, because it wasn't my stuff and it wasn't his stuff, it was our stuff. And so the stuff we did had to be stuff that we could agree on. And the very sort of secret things and private things and vulnerabilities that make a work eccentric and interesting to me, almost by definition, couldn't be there. So I feel that is the same with my film work, that I like the idea of it being unpolished in that sense.
Yeah, and I think when you were working with other directors, you sort of stuck to a specific stable of folks. Spike Jonze, I think you were on very much the same wavelength as he with Adaptation and with Being John Malkovich, and also Michel Gondry that you worked with a couple films. Yeah,
and I like both those guys a lot, and I liked working with them a lot, and I would work with them again if the situation arose. It wasn't about them. It was something, and aside from everything else, it's something that I've always wanted to do. I did it when I was a teenager. I went to film school. I intended to be a director. It was just kind of a circuitous path to it for me.
Question from Daniel. What piece of media inspires you most right now as a writer and storyteller?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm being inspired right now by anything. I'm sorry to say.
Are any particular pieces of culture, art that have really spoken to you? Obviously, Iain Reid's novel did, but anything recently that's really stood out for you?
I fairly recently read the novel Stoner, which has been recommended to me for decades now, which I avoided reading because I thought it was going to be boring. And it's certainly one of the best books I've ever read. It's an astounding novel, and I recommend it to everyone.
Excellent. Question here from Stefano. Have you also considered other media? Video games seem to offer a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, I thought about it, and I've sort of engaged a little bit with it, but I've never really. It's not a thing that I'm even involved with in my own life, so it would be kind of like a learning curve for me to get into that. I don't have the vocabulary for it. I like the idea of stories that can have lots of different endings, which I think is probably something that video games can do. That interests me, but I haven't done anything with it.
Question from Mark. Can you talk about some of the soundtrack music choices and how that pairs with visuals?
In this movie, or I'm assuming in this movie, or?
Yeah, I'm assuming as well, yes.
Yeah, well, we really, initially I wasn't going to have any score aside from the stuff that was from Oklahoma and the jingle from Tulsi Town. But we started to put some other versions of it into the story, which are kind of, in a way, acting as foreshadowing for things that are about to happen, which I think is interesting in the context of this movie, because it's sort of like because the movie is like a stew of ideas and things that this person has heard and thought about and witnessed and then made into a story. So that's, there's very little score in the movie. There's one piece that's repeated a lot. It's repeated backwards at some point in the movie. And so, that's what, I don't know what else to say about it other than that.
Another question from Stefano. What other movies about memory do you particularly like or find worth watching?
Um, I don't know. I can't think of any movies about memory. I can't remember any. Um, what are they? Well, I mean, I'm sure they're that out there, but I don't. I can't think of any. I don't feel like I've been influenced by movies about memory that I've seen. I guess. Can you think of any? I honestly can't
Yeah, I
think of
think probably like fairly contemporary, the movie Memento by Christopher Nolan back, I think that was 2000 or 2001. So I think that does touch on some of these same ideas of Eternal Sunshine, but from a different angle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that wasn't an influence on me. That movie, I can say that.
Question from OC. Did you have any influence on the casting? Toni Collette looks brilliant even in that short trailer.
Um, yeah, I mean, I casting is my choice entirely. I mean, it's my choice to ask people. They don't necessarily have to agree to be in the movie, but nobody else is casting the movie. And I mean, I think that's generally true that directors cast a movie. I mean, you can be, you can have suggestions made by the casting director, and usually that's for the smaller parts, people you might not necessarily know about. They can recommend, but I mean, everybody in this movie was my call.
I think it came together really fantastically. The casting just felt really, really great, and especially in those scenes where they were all together, the family.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very happy with the cast. They're great actors.
Question here from Krithika. What are some deeper questions, ideas that you think filmmakers will address more coming out of this pandemic?
Well, I mean, I don't know what other filmmakers are thinking about or planning to do. So I have no idea what what they're going to come out with. I'm doing developing a series for HBO, which is about a virus, based on a screenplay I wrote several years ago, based on a novel from the 70s called IQ83, which is about a virus that causes stupidity. And so I wrote that as a screenplay, and it didn't get made. But now HBO is asking me to develop it as a limited series. So I will be, in my own way, I guess, writing about the pandemic and stupidity, which I do think seem to go hand in hand right now.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing that, and I also felt like this current movie, even though it was filmed prior to the pandemic, I think it had some additional resonance when you think about all the claustrophobia in the movie and how that hits us now as we're somewhat quarantined in our own particular lives and boxed off from each other.
Yeah, it even has a conversation about viruses in it.
Mm-hmm. Question from Michael. What is your favorite, proudest single scene in one of your works? Do you have a favorite scene or some of your favorite scenes? There's so many good ones.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I like things in the movies that I've worked on, but I don't know if I have a favorite. It's not. I don't really like ranking things.
Yeah, there are so many hilarious, really memorable moments in all of your films. For me, like the seventh and a half floor from Being John Malkovich is just a very indelible, and I think back to that.
I certainly love that too. And that was the first movie that I wrote and the first movie of mine that was produced. So writing that, and I wasn't at that point in the film business. I was a TV writer.
Mm-hmm.
And not thinking that it was ever get made, and then eventually going on the set and seeing the 7.5 floor in reality that was built. That was a thrill. That was a thrill because it was so cool. you know, because it was so cool with all the little things and the little doors. And I don't know, it's just like there's an excitement, I think, the first time you see something that you've thought of, realized like that. And it was, you know.
Yeah, it was brilliantly done. It
Yeah, it
was
was beautiful.
yeah.
John Cusack and John Malkovich are both 6 feet 2 inches. So they actually had, and I think a lot of the crew was tall as well. They had to have a massage therapist on the set because people were having back problems from crouching over all the time. And it was in an office building. It was a real office building floor that they dropped the ceiling on. So there wasn't really a lot of places to go, you know, on that floor to get out from under this thing.
Wow. I can imagine just long days of filming. That sounds pretty crazy. So yeah. A question from Adam. As someone established in filmmaking, what drew you to writing your first novel? Oh, I think you sort of answered this question.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about writing a novel earlier in my life, but I never really had the time to set aside. And this in 2012 when I started, it seemed like a good time to do it. But yeah, I'm interested in literature, so it seemed like a good thing to try, and scary. And I like scary things like that, like things that I can really fail at, excite me and terrify me, which is probably where the excitement comes from.
Question from Cassidy. How did your work on adaptation affect your approach to book adaptations in general, more specifically this movie? Do you feel more or less constrained by the source text?
That's an interesting question, and one I've been actually answering in other places recently. I think that the movie adaptation freed me up. I think I approached adaptation before that, or I thought of it as something where you should be very faithful to the material, the source material. And my few stabs at that I didn't think were very interesting. I felt they were kind of dead. You know, by necessity, I moved away from that with the movie adaptation, and I found myself suddenly very free. And so I think since then, with a few exceptions, if I've taken on an adaptation, I feel it's important for me to be able to bring myself to it as a writer and then as a filmmaker, in order for it to be of any value to anyone, including myself.
Question from Lee. Your novel has been compared to Thomas Pynchon. Would you consider him an influence? What do you think of him, and who would you consider your major literary influences?
I've read a bit of Pynchon. I like what I've read. I do not consider him an influence, and you know, at least not consciously. He's not somebody that you know I read regularly or think about. So no, I mean, I don't know who my influences are. Probably more Beckett, probably more Kafka, probably Woody Allen, the Marx Brothers, Monty Python, probably James Thurber, Robert Benchley, Ionesco, Vonnegut, probably. Philip K. Dick, certainly.
Great. Question from Greg. I'm assuming this is, in what way was it different creating a film for Netflix compared to your prior productions that went to theaters first? And would you do it again?
I don't have the experience yet of the movie coming out. So I don't know what it's going to feel like when it comes out, and the circumstances are really bizarre now anyway. Mm-hmm. Like my book came out and it felt like nothing because I'm basically sitting in my apartment occasionally doing Zoom things. I think it would be nice for this movie to be seen in a theater because I I think it's beautifully shot, and I would like people to have that experience. And I think the communal nature of it, because it's a movie that I think people seem to like to talk about, is valuable. That's not really what's going to happen, but Netflix financed my movie, and nobody else was doing that. So I'm grateful to them, and I don't have anything against movies that stream, and I certainly would do it again if I have a project that they're interested in, no question.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled that it's out there in whatever form is possible nowadays. So
yeah, I agree.
And another question from Cassidy. Your films are known for being kind of out of the box. On top of developing an art for filmmaking, have you also had to develop an art for selling your ideas? Is it just a practice in perseverance?
I guess so. I don't know if it's a practice. I don't know what the practice is. I went to a years and years ago when I was when we were promoting Being John Malkovich. Spike Jonze and I went to this Sundance lab thing. It wasn't the film festival. It was some lab that they have where people come and there are seminars and stuff. And they had a seminar on pitching, and we went and watched it. We sat in the back and watched it. And it was like producers and executives and stuff like that on stage. And then these people would come up to a microphone, off the stage and pitch the idea. And like they would start to say, so, okay, my story starts in a school, and the people on stage would say, stop, you can't do that. This is not how you pitch a movie. And they would not let these people speak. And it was such a power trip and so bizarre and so mean-spirited. Like, we know how to pitch something because we're in the business and we see it all the time, and you're clearly an idiot or green or whatever they were saying. But I mean, my feeling is that that's garbage. You tell a story, if you're pitching something, you tell a story and you tell it the way you would tell it because you're you. And I don't know if I've developed any sort of techniques, and nor do I know if I would want to, because I think there's something really creepy about sort of, altering yourself and the way you present yourself in the world to appeal to, what amounts to some very horrible people. Certainly perseverance is important in any pursuit. I can't argue against that, but I think if you believe the thing that you're telling and it's important to you and it's exciting to you, then that will be conveyed. If you're conveying it to people who are actually interested in hearing something.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think your movies have spoken to so many people. So thank you for doing them and for persevering. And with that, I think we need to wrap up. But I wanted to thank you again so much, Charlie, for coming to talk about the movie. And again, I'm thinking of Ending Things will be out on Netflix on September 4th.
Thank you very much.